Naptown Tuner here. We're talking fuel injectors this time. First, I'm going to show you cylinder heads. We're going to show you some variations. We're going to show you some different things about the variations through the years. Maybe you didn't know, okay? Maybe even some of the most experienced people on this platform are going to learn something from this video. I bet you. You stay tuned. Let's get started. We're going to look at these cylinder heads right here that were just already sitting here. Ready for a rebuild? They'll go to the machine shop eventually. They're sitting in line. Now, first off, I can tell that this is an early engine from like 2009 to 2011 just by looking at this right here. This is the lift point for the engine whenever you pull it out. Whenever you pull the engine out, this will be where you connect the chains. There's one in the front, and there's one in the back right there. Just like that. Okay, the one in the front's the one we're looking at. Like I was saying, the one that's boxed in is the early one. And then we move on to the second generation type mount right here. You see this? It's more slender. It's just a slender one instead of a boxed in one. Okay? Now, moving on to the second generation of cylinder head. There is not a variation until it gets to, it depends on the type of vehicle it's in. For instance, I have even a 2013 A6 with a 2-liter that is not flex fuel, but somewhere around 2014 they went to flex fuel. Okay, so the cylinder heads are actually different. Let me show you. The manifold actually bolts in different. So this is a 2012 plus cylinder head I showed you just based on the engine mount, and then we're looking at where this intake manifold bolts to. So this one just has these two mounting holes right here, and there's not going to be anything else in the center here. We're looking at where my finger is right here, and right here. Okay, hang on, I'm going to show you the next one. So that means that a plastic manifold goes on. That means that this is not flex fuel. This next cylinder head is going to look exactly like it, but it has this subtle little difference. And this subtle difference is, do you see? Let's look where my fingers are. That bolt hole right here and this bolt hole right here. That allows you to bolt a different style, the updated style fuel rail on it, and then that will be the 2-part intake manifold. And higher wear resistant materials were used in the valve seats in the TFSI cylinder head because of the lack of lubrication properties in the ethanol. Okay, Naptown Tuner here. I put some effort into this one, so you better like and subscribe. I'm gonna do the intake manifold / fuel injector in real time. Watch. I have a mount right here, and sometimes whenever I need to use both hands, I'm gonna try to mount it up. I'm gonna try to get you the best view at all times. First, this is our 2.0 liter TFSI. This is a 2009 engine. The first step on removing the intake manifold is taking off the oil filter. So my favorite tool for doing that is just a big fat pair of pliers. I like Nipex. And that one was cranked on there pretty good. Someone really muscled that one on there. So after about a full turn, now it's hand loosened. All right, the next step is this the breather assembly. There's the hose that goes to the intake manifold. You see that right here? We're gonna carefully disconnect it by pushing on both sides and then pulling it out. All right. Theoretically, you don't have to take both sides out, but we took both sides out with one hand. All right, now we have the wiring. Let's go ahead and get the wiring out of the way. We have the oil pressure sensor. Actually, there's the oil filter. We have the air intake temperature sensor. We have the throttle body wiring. And then we can tuck this out of the way. Now, to speed things up, I'm gonna see what kind of view you have, because we need to get rocking and rolling. Not a good one. Okay, we're gonna try to do as best as we can with this view here. If I think I need to pull it off and show you a better view, then I think I'll try to do that. But the next step is the air intake hose that goes from the hard pipe to the throttle body. So we take a flathead screwdriver or a 7mm and we unscrew each one about 6 full turns. And then the way to get that pipe off is to take your palm in the middle of that hose and then just go pop, 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 pop. And then look, it just pops right off. I swear it just slides right off every single time. All right. Now we got this coolant hose that's on top of the alternator. Okay. We take a T30. There's a screw that goes in the plastic there. So we unscrew the T30. And then we bend this. This one's disconnected where the oil funnel is, but you just bend that to the side, okay? So, next step, we have the evap line right here. See it? Pull the evap line off. There's 2 little plastic clips. Just bend that all the way over to the side. Okay? Next step, we have another evap line. Okay, it's on the back. This is called the N80 purge valve. This is a little spring clamp. These spring clamps can be finicky. Check this out. This is a pair of Nipex pliers that's specifically for spring clamps, and it has a little jaw in there. They cost like 80 bones. They ain't cheap. All right, but those spring clips, if you don't want to waste a bunch of time and have to replace the thing with a screw clamp every time, and I swear they'll pay for themselves after a little while if you do this stuff a lot. And then we pop, see this? This is another tool. They sell this at Harbor Freight, and then I bought the same one off the Matco truck for like 5 times more. And then there's a couple vacuum hoses, and you literally just, even the one with the silver clamp on it, you literally just completely straight, not at any kind of angle. You literally just pull the hose and it pops off, and you see how it's still on there. Whenever you put it on, you just take this off and you just put it on without it. It's not going to come off. The other one does not have a little plastic one, but the key to pulling these vacuum hoses off on the little tiny brittle plastic nipples on those little vacuum solenoids is you just pull them perfectly straight, and they pop right off. All right, and then this whole back assembly right here, you push it, that metal hose, you push it to the side, okay? Now what do we have? We have high pressure fuel line back here, this big brass fitting, okay? First you take the wiring harness here and push it to the side, and then you either take the best thing is a 17mm like stubby wrench or something. You can put a full-size wrench in there now that you just saw my trick. I always like to use, the next best thing is this plier wrench with the clean jaw, but I'm really good at using my knurled jaw Nipex, and I use it for almost everything, so I'm going to use it for this application. So we're just going to bust it loose, and that's all it takes. All you have to do is turn it like an 1/8 turn, and then you screw the rest of it off by hand. And you know, another good idea is to go ahead and take this screw out right here in that same fuel line, and then that gives you a little bit more slack in that fuel line, and then that way you don't bend it and it won't be impossible to put back together, because now you have a little bit of leeway in it. See, you have a little bit of leeway in it, and it's not going to bend and be impossible, because if you don't get that perfectly lined up, you see this? If you don't get that perfectly lined up, then this nut is going to be really difficult to spin back on. okay? Now, we have the RPM sensor, or the sensor for the camshaft. There's two sensors, the camshaft crankshaft. You'll have a camshaft crankshaft correlation if you need a timing chain, okay? Moving on, we have these connectors down here, right next to the throttle body. This one right here is your knock sensor. This one right here goes to your fuel injectors. This one right here, one or the other go to just the general stuff, to like your coolant temp sensor and your water pump. There's a fuel. There's a fuel quality sensor in the flex fuel ones. There's a high pressure fuel sensor in here. Anyway, moving on. There's the next thing down here I might have to move the camera for, because this is the Now let's take a look at that throttle body and that intake manifold. You see this brace directly behind the intake manifold. I'm going to point at it now. This brace right here, aluminum brace. See this right here? I'm spinning it. That's a nut that goes on the top. It's directly behind the intake. The intake right here. Throttle body, intake throttle body. Okay, now let's look down lower in there. Do you see this right here? This is my extension with my triple square. Let's take a look at what size it is. 10. All right, and then that goes down at the bottom. See that? Directly behind the alternator at the bottom of that. Then we loosen it. So you don't want to take the top nut. You want to loosen the top nut, and then you want to take the bottom bolt all the way loose. You don't have to take the bottom bolt out, but you take the bottom bolt all the way loose. And then you take the nut on the top all the way out, which I already did. Okay, I guess it doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm just filling time with talking. The object is to get that deal out of the way. What you do have to be cautious of, a lot of times this power cable is live, okay folks? This power cable right here, it's live. A lot of times it'll have a plastic cap on it, but if someone's fooled with it or if someone's worked on it, then it might be missing. So whenever you for instance, pull this aluminum bracket out, you don't want to ground it against power to ground. You want to be very careful with tools with that power wire. And that applies to every car with an alternator and a power wire, okay? So now the next step. Now, since you just got that brace out of the way, it's a good idea to, before you forget, to get that coolant temp sensor out of that water pump, because that will be connected to the wiring harness whenever you pull the intake manifold off. So I can usually stick my hand in there, but when I'm filming here, I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can get it loose with a pick. So a lot of times whenever I'm getting it loose with a pick, instead of going, let me get a closer view. Instead of going on the actual trigger, I'll go at the very end and unlock the trigger with the pick. So I'll do that on a different one that's easier to see, that's not tucked way back in there. But next step. Okay, after you get that coolant temp sensor loose, I just wanted to mention you can take these 4 bolts off to get this throttle body off, but I'm just showing you to do it without. So look right here behind the alternator. See that 10 millimeter? On the very other side, there's a 10 millimeter as well. Those are on studs. Everything else is a bolt. Everything else is a bolt. There's more on top than there is in the bottom. There's 1, 2, you don't take that one out, you take this one out. 1, 2, 3, you don't take that one out, you take this one out. 4, 5, and then there's 4 in the bottom. It's just like the exhaust. It's the same setup. 5 on the top, 4 on the bottom. Okay. Now, next step is the T30s. Let's go ahead and take out the T30s. There's what I prefer to do is use a long, and then break it loose. Just break all of them loose. All right, now there's little channels here. See that T30? And then another one right here. See that T30? And then in this channel, that's gonna be the 10 millimeter. In those 10 millimeters, you have to use a deep well socket with a magnet in hand, okay? So I'm gonna skip ahead to the next step. Okay, we're zipping the bolts out of the intake manifold. This is the T30s. Zip, 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 zip. Remember, 2 T30s on the bottom. I showed you already where they were. All right, now the 10 millimeters, if you don't put, you gotta use a deep well, and if you don't put a magnet up next to it, you're gonna lose it. So I put the magnet up just through the top of the manifold. So, and you can see it through the top as well. So you just do exactly like I'm doing with the deep well 10 millimeter. And then I'll show you how I pull it out. Okay, even with me holding the magnet there, it still fell, but this is a crummy magnet. Now the front, you can put your finger here and you can grab the 10 millimeter with your finger. You can keep all the bolts in the intake manifold. I prefer to get all the bolts loose and all the bolts all the way out. That way, you know for a fact that you don't lose them, and you know that they're not going to be obstructing you from getting the intake manifold off. We got all the bolts out. Now, everything is loose. Let me show you this. In this carrier, this knock sensor wire is gonna stay with the block. Everything else comes with the engine. It's very difficult to get it out of that electrical connector. If you take your time and you're careful, you can pop it out, okay? I made it look easy. All right, now you kind of tuck that underneath this hose. Okay, guess what time it is? It's remove intake manifold time. Okay, first you just need, if you're manly and you got some girth and some strength, just try to do it like this. You grab both sides right here, and then the idea is to just pull back and side to side as even as possible. And if you do it, another trick is and tip is you might want to either vacuum the junk off the top of the intake manifold or blow it off with air. Try not to get it in this oil filter area. Okay, remove the intake manifold. Perfect. All right, let's show you. Here's the situation when I pulled the intake manifold off. You saw how much persuasion it took to pull it off, okay? You see this little plastic ring right here? There we go. See the pick? This little plastic ring right here, that is the early style. The early style has this in all 4 injectors, okay? The early means the older one. The newer ones are gonna have this right here pushed up on the injector. It's gonna be pushed up on the injector like that if I were to push it over on it, okay? And then they're all gonna have this collar further up. See that collar right here, here, here? So 3 of these injectors are stuck in. If you'll notice, the O-ring is on that injector. The O-ring is stuck in here on that one, or maybe it's fallen, and same deal with there. So now you're gonna wanna get these connectors off. The real early ones don't have a locking tab. If it has a locking tab, you need to be extra super careful with the locking tab, because if you break the little ends off the locking tab, then you're even more screwed, because sometimes you can only get one side of the locking tab. This one is a normal one. You just press the trigger and it pulls back. So you can either take a pick in the top of it and pull them back like that, or you can do it by hand. So I just did it with a pick, and then here's an example of doing it by hand. And then like this here. So we've got it loose, now we can pull it out of the way. All right. Now what do we have? We have, like I said, this plastic ring came out. You want to save those plastic rings and put those back in and be extremely careful with those. And then let's go ahead and pull these collars off, and then we'll see how difficult it is to get these out. And maybe before you even start, you might want to spray some penetrating oil on those, because that's going to help. It's going to seep in that little tiny crack, and it's going to help. All right, this one I can move side to side, side to side, side to side. I can barely move them all side to side, so that's a good sign. So now we're gonna get some penetrating oil. Okay, now the way that you do it at the dealership is there's a little tiny ridge. There's a ridge in this plastic, and you slide a super special collar over it, and then you take a mini slide hammer and you go tap, 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 and it pulls it out absolutely flawlessly. But if you're super, super careful, you can put either a flathead screwdriver or a pry bar behind it. First we're gonna start with a flathead screwdriver, because that's the most common thing. All right, so the idea is when you pry it, let me see if I can prop this phone up. The idea is when you pry behind the fuel injector, you can counter push on it, and that really helps get the sealant behind it. So as you pry one angle, you're counter holding it. And if you haven't done this before, you might not know how seized some of these. All right, then when you work on it a little bit, then you can spin it from side to side. Now, I'm not using the best tool. Let me I have a small pry bar here with a little bit better angle. You see that? That's a little bit better angle I can get behind it. And then I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna just and the idea is really kind of just jolt it, and you see it just popped right out. All right, and there's a plastic retainer. All right, this one here, we're gonna counter hold it. Okay, just gonna work on it. All right, spin it from side to side a little bit, trying to work that penetrating oil in it. The idea is whenever you're prying behind it, you're barely prying behind it. The idea is you're trying to jolt it. You're jolting the penetrating oil behind it. And you do that for a little bit, and then you spin it for a little bit. And then this one is being really stubborn. They can be very stubborn. And when they're stubborn, you can get a longer pry bar, but you have to be extremely careful about that. See, this is a longer pry bar. It's a more robust pry bar, but you have to be, see, look at that. You have to be extremely careful with that plastic. And then look at this, pull it out. Okay? Now, when you're dealing with these O-rings, if you're super careful with them, you can reuse them, but I suggest replacing them. I suggest replacing them, okay? I suggest replacing them. But a good way to reuse them is to use some tire shine, okay? I've learned over the years, even penetrating oil, grease, all kinds of different things that you put on them and they can cut. But for some reason, when I put tire shine on those injector O-rings, they slide right on and have never cut. So that's a little pro tip right there. All right, one more thing before I leave is sometimes there's an air leak in the back of this intake manifold from this linkage right here. These are the tumbler valves. Nothing to do with the tumbler valves, but there's this linkage right here. Sometimes there's an air leak back here. All right, until next time, Naptown Tuner. Okay, here's a better view of the intake manifold. The O-rings got stuck inside here. One of the fuel injectors pulled out with it. We've got our 3 fuel injectors. One of the O-rings pulled out on that fuel injector. These are the inserts that go inside the head before you put the fuel injectors on. They go flat side down, convex side. Fuel injector goes into like that. Make sure that these shoulders go on. Okay, now we're gonna assemble it. First, if you want to or need to, for any reason, reuse these, see, this is not sharp. This is not gonna cut it. You need to be extremely careful with these if you pull them out and wanna reuse them. But just very, very delicately pop them out and then don't get them dirty. Put them to the side for safekeeping, okay? Very, very, very delicately, all right? Now what we're gonna do is pop them on the fuel injectors. If you can, put them, index them the way they were, if you see, whatever side. So anyway, you throw these in. Like I said, you can clean this off. In my opinion, don't clean the valves. At some point, take the cylinder head off and rebuild it. That's the best way to do it. If you need to clean the valves, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it, is what I typically do. So you put those in, and then you want to make sure that before you put your fuel injectors on, you want to make sure that your shoulders are on, and then you see how it goes in at an angle right there. I'm trying to do all this with one hand. Okay, then before you put them in, you want to put, like I said earlier, some tire shine on it. And then look how easy it slides in once you put a little bit of tire shine on it. It just slips right in. I mean, you didn't even feel it go in. It went in so easy. Okay? All right, next I'm going to show you how to insert it into the head again. Okay, now the idea is you have to line up both of these studs, and then you have all 4 individual injectors that are kind of floppy, and you have to rotate the intake manifold up and down and kind of put it into place. So we're gonna try to do this with one hand here. What you do is you have to, see on the side there, you line up those studs. So on both sides, that side there too, you see that stud? Right there. All right, once you have the stud slid on, see it's gonna go like that, and then you're gonna move it up and down like that until you can get all the fuel injectors set. And then then you push it flush. Now, see how that's sitting good too, since you took that screw out? That's gonna be easy to screw in. It might be a good idea to go ahead and screw that in right now before you do anything else, because it's gonna be more difficult to do it later. Okay, now you just put everything back together like I showed you how to take it apart. That's all there is to it. Like, comment, and subscribe. Naptown Tuner.